So we wanted to dig a little bit deeper into the Inflation Reduction Act, so-called, that passed the Senate last night. Washington Post reporter Jeff Stein highlighted some standouts from the bill that includes money for clean energy, like $80 billion for electric vehicles, heat pumps, home solar installation, as well as a 15% tax on corporations with more than $1 billion in profits, and Medicare prescription drug negotiation.
However, not all Democrats were on board. Senator Bernie Sanders criticized the bill and said it would not do enough to combat inflation. The former presidential candidate is now calling for an extension of the child tax credit, which was left out of the final legislation. And lower prices on insulin also failed to make it into the final text. A big win, obviously, for the pharma lobbyists, which comes after Republicans blocked the measure from passing. You can see here just how much the U.S. pays for insulin, my God, in comparison to other countries. You can also see here Chile comes second, but it's not even close to the U.S. Price. And we can come back to that in a minute. I think it's a shame that the prescription drug negotiation got left out. I take Bernie's criticisms of it on that front in particular. I also, my kind of big takeaway with the bill is, look, you can say that these policies are important, they're necessary on their own because whatever, we have to fight climate change, so we have to encourage green energy. You can say that, you can say, we should have the child tax credit because families need it. I just don't understand how you can say that all of these things together are going to reduce inflation. Because more government spending is, to my mind, one of the surer ways to exacerbate inflation. That seems to me to be what most economists think about the issue, that runaway government spending is not, I don't think it's the only cause of inflation in this case, but that it does cause inflation. So it's one of, I think this bill is in the long, kind of proud tradition of congressional acts that are called something that do not correspond at all to what they'll accomplish, Patriot Act type stuff. But that's not to say that maybe the individual provisions can stand on their own. They just don't look very likely to reduce inflation, to my mind. And I don't think that's a crazy thing to say. But what's your takeaway on it, Batya?
I definitely think it's going to have very little impact on inflation because inflation is a right now problem, and this is very long term. It's going to take a long time for us to see the impact of this bill on the economy, years. And hopefully, please God, by then inflation will have been resolved naturally or in some other way. So I totally agree with you about the branding. Democrats wanted to be able to go campaign and say, we passed the Inflation Reduction Bill, right? And hope that nobody was paying attention to what was in it, which, obviously belies the contempt that they have for their voters, as if they don't know better. But, aside from the question of that branding, that was, just typical Democratic gaslighting, what is your take on what's in the bill? How do you feel about what made it in? Can you support these things, Robby?
I mean, no, but I'm sure. Well, like I said, I do support the Medicare prescription drug negotiation. Absolutely, that seems like something that it doesn't seem like a conflict from my standpoint in terms of like libertarian views. It's obviously a complicated policy question, but yes, absolutely the government should be able to negotiate to lower those prices. I mean, especially if the government's going to subsidize all of them, why wouldn't we want those prices to be lower? It doesn't, it's just a giveaway in terms of how it's structured now to big pharma. And yes, and I take the left's point, and it's not just the left's point, a lot of libertarians make this point too, the kind of opportunity for corporatism, for cronyism, for, these companies, the powerful companies, and the drug companies being some of the most powerful lobbying influence peddlers that there are, can structure the U.S. government to subsidize their products or require their products to do all sorts of things. I think the left usually approaches these issues by saying, and that's why we need to fight lobbying or tax these corporations more or make them contribute more, whereas my solution tends to be, and that's why we need to give the government less power to given that the government is the tool by which these corporations kind of inflict their will on everyone. So let's weaken the tool, and that is my way of going about it. And on the other stuff, look, the climate stuff seems both very cronyist in some ways, like, subsidies for all these kinds of green companies, which are very cutting edge environmental technologies. I don't know how much the people are obviously the people are not demanding them enough, because we wouldn't need to subsidize them if people were lining up to put solar panels on their houses. Now, probably what we could do is get rid of all the terrible regulations that make it more difficult for people to do things like put solar panels on your houses. Every time I hear from someone who tried to do this, it turns out and now these are often regulations at the local level, which can be just as annoying as large federal regulations, but they find out that, there's some reason why you have to get permission from the town council or whoever the authority is to do it, and it's very irritating. I certainly don't think the government should make it harder for people who care about the environment and want to spend their own money and invest in environmental strategies. That said, subsidizing these things to this extent is, I think, a lot trickier, I get that climate change is an important thing that we need to combat, but I don't know. I have mixed feelings about it, at the very least, mixed feelings.
And where are you on the 15% minimum corporate tax? Do you believe that corporations should be paying zero in taxes? Where do you fall on that?
You're really trying to twist the knife here. You're trying to expose my absolute zero tax agenda. I don't know. That 15% might be a reasonable tax rate for these corporations. Yes, I want everyone, including corporations, everyone to pay as little taxes as possible, unleash the productive powers of the market to make our lives better. They pass these taxes along to everyone else. But honestly, the bigger taxes are probably not the main issue for a lot of these companies. It's what are the punitive regulations that make life harder for them to do business, for them to make it harder for them to hire more people, or open new factories, or do all of those things. Those are the proactive measures by the government that we need to get out of the way so they can create more value for the economy. Obviously, they do have to, yes, pay some amount of taxes. We do need to fund, we fund a government that is, in my ideal world, much more minimal than the one we have currently. But you do have to fund some kind of government. And now, so much of what the government does, I would not have us do. And that's probably something that, you and many of our left-leaning viewers would agree with that on some fronts. We want less funding for, bombs, missiles, or guns going to Ukraine or wherever else we have inflicted our kind of military footprint. We want less money for all that stuff. Less money for the police to harass property owners. Now there's a place for police certainly, but for the SWAT team to break down your grandmother's door in the middle of the night because they have it's a wrong door raid or some trivial non-violent, non-threatening drug charge, something like that. That stuff happens all the time. I want less funding for those kinds of government projects, and I suspect many of our viewers do as well, and probably you as well. But we do
absolutely
have to have a government of a certain size. Sure, I guess.
Glad to have ripped that concession from you, Robby.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that, Batya. But so, what's your impression overall of the provisions of the bill? Do you think this is going to help out the working class, and this is really good for them, or are a lot of struggling people going to say, yeah, more money for green energy subsidies? What does that do for me?
It's complicated. I mean, I was really disappointed that, when President Trump promised he was going to, force these companies to allow Medicare to negotiate lower prices, that never happened on his watch. So I'm very happy. See, I totally agree with you. I think that's definitely going to help a lot of working class people. Obviously, I mean, we've talked about this a lot, but I think that the climate stuff is the exact opposite. It's, who is in the market for solar panels for their roof? A person who owns their own home, which, as we talk about, ad nauseum, is something that is really out of reach for the vast majority of Americans today, especially working class and middle class Americans, right? A $12,000 rebate on an electric vehicle, who's that going to help? Well, somebody who has $60,000 sitting in their bank account to spend on a Tesla, right? It's a lot. And then the sort of corporate welfare of it all, giving tax breaks to corporations for going green. I mean, to me, that's just, you could have a much bigger impact on the environment by just banning private jets, but they would never in a million years do that because the Democrats' base is like the private jet set, right? Like they love flying around in their private jets, like the number one, number two, flyers of private jets. There was a report last week, it was like Taylor Swift, Oprah Winfrey and Steven Spielberg, right? These are not Republicans, right? So, to me, it's sort of like this climate stuff often ends up being a form of class warfare where, rich people get high on their own, supply, basically, making zero sacrifices and then enforcing these sort of attacks on the working class. So I'm not sort of like a lot less excited about that, but I'm very excited about the provision to allow Medicare to negotiate drug prices. I'm excited about the money that's going to go to the IRS, hopefully to sort of get people at the top, not people at the bottom, as we discussed earlier today. And so I feel that this was a real achievement on behalf of the Democrats. And the other thing I'll say is, so Bernie came in very upset, saying this is going to do nothing, right, in classic Bernie fashion. And then the rest of the Democrats sort of shut down all of his amendments. People were criticizing both sides of that, right? They were shutting down all of his proposed amendments, for things that I think are really important, like adding, dental care and vision care to Medicare and things like this. They were shutting them down because they were worried that any disturbance of the balance here would cost them a vote, which they needed every vote to pass this. People were getting upset at both sides, but to me, like this is what successful politicking looks like. Bernie shows up and says, we didn't go far enough, which is true. And everybody else says, yes, it's true. We'll get there, somewhere else. Let's move this along incrementally. So I thought that was I was glad to see that something is working in our government, right? Something is getting passed. And I think a lot of this stuff is very popular with the American people. Corporations making over $1 billion in profits, like asking them to pay 15% in corporate tax. I think most Americans are on board with that. Most Americans are definitely on board with negotiating drug prices. It has huge amounts of popularity. Exactly. So, it's a good day, I think.
Well, that's a great opinion. I'm not sure about inflation reduction, but we will see. And we'll have more Rising right after this.